These institutions are smart, and they've gone and they've seen that they can get tuition fees that are 4 or 5 times more than what my kids pay at McGill or Acadia, and they've made money off it. They haven't necessarily provided the student experience that was promised to these people that brought in.
This is the situation, and well, they're now actually running scared on this one. Darshan Maharaja, thank you so much for joining me once again to discuss this international student fiasco that's been happening at more of a length than the last video that we just did, but to talk a bit about what you've done, the journalism that you brought forward, what other people have been bringing forward, and how the Liberals have adjusted, let's say, to this information coming to light. I mean, it's not that they didn't know about it. It's just that now it's more known across the board.
Well, it's interesting how suddenly the right thing gets done when the government's polls are tanking, because the couple of things have happened. One is that on a host of fronts, the policies of government are becoming a lot unpopular. People are unhappy. Their polls are in the tank. And at the same time, all the reporting that was done mostly by independent journalists, mainstream media did a minimal part in this. Let me be very frank here. Although it would be unfair to say that they did nothing, they did a minimal part. Much of the nuts and bolts of the information at the granular level was brought forward in the public sphere by independent journalists. And I mean, apart from myself, there are a lot many, Justice Quiz being one of them, Ben Rabidu is another, and Sabrina Mado was writing about it in National Post. So that is the mainstream media part. But, the granular level of detail is where the horror of the situation becomes clearer. Because it sounds a little bit vague saying, these are the numbers and these are the percentages. But when you show a photograph of a college that is located on top of a, massage parlor, or in a, strip mall where it's just a storefront unit, things like that. And, the Sunview College that we showed the photo of in the previous video, that photo was taken at around 2 p.m. on a weekday.
And when you would normally see bustling things happening at a university, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. In a lot of Indian languages, we say that there aren't even crows flying around. It was that empty. So, it becomes a lot more clear to the viewer or to the reader as to what kind of a problem this is. And that has created a public awareness where I think it became now impossible for the government not to act. So they have been forced into doing this. They have gone there kicking and screaming, but at least they have done something.
So I want to raise this to everyone's attention. If you haven't seen the first video that we did, this is the time where you go check it out. I'll leave a link right at the very top of the description. Go check out that. It's an hour and a half long, and we discuss all about the work that Darshan and others have been doing to unearth this whole debacle, of what you said is, a scam. It's a scam. It's a scam to get people to come to Canada on a false dream and really screw them over, and then screwing Canadians over in this whole process by flooding hundreds of thousands of people over here on just that, the false promise. Now, even Mark Miller, addressing your point about the massage parlor universities, and he says it here in his conference, talking about how they're going to be putting a cap on international students.
It is not the intention of this program to have sham commerce degrees or business degrees that are sitting on top of a massage parlor that someone doesn't even go to, and then they come into the province and drive an Uber. If you need a dedicated channel for Uber drivers in Canada, I can design that, but that isn't the intention of an international student program.
So it isn't the intention, but this is what a lot of people have been bringing up for a while, and even the Conservative Party's been talking about this. And as you and I both pointed out, that anytime you bring this up, you're called racist or insensitive to the plight of poor people in poor countries, and this is a way of shutting the conversation down. And in fact, here's Mark Miller only a few months ago doing just that.
Look, international students are a credit to this country, Mr. Speaker. They are the future of this country, and they are an asset that is very lucrative, and they are an asset that is very lucrative.
And they are an asset that is very lucrative.
And we cannot let them down. Clearly, we need to work with provinces to make sure that they have proper housing, and we have to crack down on agents that are giving them false hope across the country, but let's not make this a partisan issue.
So let's not make this a partisan issue, he says. I don't think it is a partisan issue. I think this is bipartisan. This is unilaterally people's concern, on many fronts. This is a concern of Canadians because, well, we have a housing shortage right now. This is a big problem here in Canada, as well as a humanitarian issue. If people are coming over here on false promises, paying massive amounts of money out of pocket to these agencies that are leaving them high and dry without proper immigration, using this scheme of fly-by-night colleges to get them in the country in the first place, and then just leave them high and dry, and then they get put into bad situations. Again, watch the original video and get into this, but why the about face on this one? Why do you believe that the Liberals are turning around and saying, okay, let's fix this?
Why? Because, the public awareness reached a point where they could not ignore to amend the policy anymore. More and more people were absolutely wild about this, saying this is completely wrong. We are bringing young people over, we are exploiting them. The process that brings them over is shot through with corruption. I was just on Greg Brady's morning show at 6:40 a.m. Radio station around 7 o'clock this morning. And I said, the entire process is filled with, malfeasance, because you have, over in India, you have agents who are licensed or unlicensed. They are engaging in malfeasance. The students themselves, the prospective students, are resorting to less than honest means to produce documents that would make them eligible. We talked about that at length in the previous video. And once they come here, the colleges are, so many of them are just offering nothing in the way of education. It's just a way for them to make money based on people's ambition to come to Canada. Even the public colleges, like Conestoga College getting 32,000 students in a 16-month period, that's 2,000 students a month on average. Of course, they come in lots because they're, every month they are not taking in students. The main intake happens at the start of the term. So it's a massive influx every time. I'm hearing from people living in near these public colleges as to how, the kids are just left to themselves. They haven't even thought about where these kids are going to live. That is the first requirement of being a human. What distinguishes humans? There are a few things, but one of them is that we have a permanent place where we go to sleep.
That's right.
It may change. It may change. Like, 1 year I'm living here, then I move to another place. But for the time being, it's a permanent place where I go to sleep every night. That doesn't happen in the animal kingdom, right? So that is one of the, distinguishing features of the human race. And for someone not to think about where these kids are going to sleep is not pardonable, in my opinion. But they didn't think about it. I remember here in Brampton, there was some kind of a discussion a few years ago. And the Sheridan College guys said that they need the municipality to pitch in some money and funding and this and that. No, you are making the money, you pitch it in. My point is very clear. You cannot privatize profits and socialize losses or costs, right? So, there was that bit of malfeasance. Then all the, investor homeowners who were putting these students in subhuman living conditions, the employers who were exploiting the students, including sexual exploitation. There was, there are UN reports of trafficking. So all that was happening while, and I'm not prepared to believe that the federal government did not know that this was happening. They may not have known each and every detail, but at a broader level, they would have known that there was a lot of wrong that was being committed in this whole regime, and it took public pressure for them to act. On one hand, you can say that is democracy, but on the other hand, I don't like the way it had to come about. Should have come about much earlier, of their own volition, saying we are seeing things going wrong here.
Well, that's the ultimate question here. Is you ask the politicians to do a thing, you bring it to their attention, they tell you that it's a lucrative asset, don't worry about it, and then when there's public outcry because you bring the attention to it, that's when they make an about face, and then they become the heroes, and they say, well, we didn't know that there was this kind of malfeasance going on in the industry. Well, did they? I mean, obviously we don't have the answer to this today, but this is the ultimate question for voters moving forward, is to say, did they really not think that there was malfeasance happening here when they were being told by independents? It wasn't until there was a popular opinion of people's, being brought to their attention, that it became an issue. Now, even mayors in Canada have been bringing this up. This is a tweet that went out from David Jacobs on an article, I think from the Globe and Mail. Yeah, that's right. Brampton mayor picked. Patrick Brown calls for more restrictive international student visas. This is a massive resource drain. The city gets no compensation for the fact that they are not paying taxes. They're living quite often 16 people in a basement apartment. Mayor Brown said this. The exploitation of international students reflects poorly on Canada. And this is when, as soon as you point out this part of it, this aspect of it, then you can no longer go with the, oh, if you argue against this, you're racist or whatever. It really gets into the, wow, no, there are people really doing some awful things in this country, and they're doing it to people who are we're welcoming in on false premises. And then also the idea that they're coming in through a back door while the Canadian public is suffering through housing crisis. And then also people are making, I mean, I'm making a whole list of all the things in my head here as I'm talking with you about this, but it really is absolutely outrageous to me that even though it was brought to their attention, nobody's looking into this. Now,
I'm happy that Mayor Brown has spoken about it, but he has known about it for much longer. So I'm questioning why he had to wait until now. I'll give you, an example. Back in 2019 or early 2019 or thereabouts, at the city council meeting in Brampton, two of the councillors said that when they had gone out campaigning for the October 2018 election, they saw 15, 20, one councillor said 25 students living in a basement. This they said at a council meeting. It is on the record. Mayor Brown had just been elected in 2018 as mayor. So it's not that he has come to know about this now. Even at the time, my question would have been to these two councillors, did you report it to any authorities, or were you more concerned about the few votes of the homeowners? See, we have to be very clear in this, and I am being completely non-partisan. Politicians will pay attention to issues when they have the potential to affect that politician, positively or negatively. This thing was reported, and one councillor openly saying that there were 25 students living in the basement in one house. Any reasonable human being would have done something about it, and especially one in a position of trust and authority, like a city councillor, should have reported it to the relevant authorities within the city administration. They didn't. They revealed that they didn't. And the mayor, who is now making noise about this, was silent about it, right? So it's not like this has grown despite people's opposition. This has grown because at all the relevant points, whatever was going on had a lot of political support.
So they knew about it. It's just that the Johnny public didn't know about it, and this is why it wasn't a concern to them. That's just, I mean, that's unforgivable in my opinion, in my estimate of it. Especially when it becomes so outrageous when the public do become aware of this. That you know, obviously, people were really upset when they watched our original video together when we were discussing this, because for a lot of people this is something that's not been well known. This is something that's, it really is kind of an underworld within our own country, to think that there are subclasses in Canada, that there is this underclass of people who are, you know, lured in on false promises and then trapped in with this whole immigration scheme. And there are some really bad parties involved here, especially when it comes to giving people work visas. Now, I wanted to get into this. I know there's an acronym for these work visas that are tied to an employer, not necessarily with the colleges. What was that acronym again?
LMIA.
The LMIA Visa. So
that is Labor Market Impact Assessment. Basically, the idea being that if I employ this person, there isn't going to be an impact in the local labor market because there is no one willing to work for this position.
Right. And we went over this. I'm just going to briefly go over it quickly for anyone who isn't aware of this. So if there's a business and you have a hard time finding someone to employ for your business and there's a position available, you can put out an advertisement. And if you can prove to the government or immigration that you're having a hard time filling that role, then you can hire people. But there's ways of flubbing this information. There's ways of being inaccurate, untruthful, and then bringing in people nonetheless. And then, as you pointed out, some of these organizations, nefarious ones, are actually selling these visas to the applicants, selling it to the people that are going to be working for them for upwards of $20,000-$50,000. It's really disgusting, and they're hiring them in there at the lowest possible wages for entry-level positions that, you know, kids in college, kids and stuff like that could be getting these jobs. And, you know, a lot of kids are saying, I can't find a job because everywhere I apply, they say you don't have enough experience. This is a whole can of worms. It's unbelievable. But then now Mark Miller's come out and he said today, at the time of recording this, that they're no longer going to give out open work permits for spouses of students, international students in Canada, unless they're in a professional or a doctoral program, a master's degree, that kind of thing. Now, this leaves open a lot of people whose spouses will no longer be eligible for that. So what are they going to do? My knee-jerk reaction after talking to you was that, are these people going to now be even more dependent on these work permits through these organizations, the one that we're discussing now, where they're going to have to pay money to and be extorted by these agencies in order to get work permits? Is this something that's going to actually become more prevalent because of the actions of the federal government now?
Good question. See, the change does not apply to people who are already here and holding that work permit. The open work permit for the spouse of the student, which means they can work for any employer. It's not tied to any particular employer. If they are holding that open work permit, they continue to be eligible to work in Canada. The change is only going to apply to the students who come here after September 1.
Okay.
Now, I'm not sure whether this applies to visa issued after September 1, because September being when the fall semester begins, the visa would have been issued before September 1, hopefully sometime in August. So I'm not entirely clear on that. But in any event, at some point, the open work permit for the spouse of the student is going to stop being available to international students unless they are in STEM fields and master's programs and medical fields.
I always thought that that would be the prerequisite for any sort of immigration period, is that you would have to be in a STEM field, something that we require here in Canada, if that's the idea. Otherwise, you would come here, you would study, you wouldn't have a work permit, you would have just a study to be here permit, and then see you later. You're studying basket weaving. We don't need basket weavers here in Canada much. So thanks for paying money in our colleges. But yeah, see what I'm seeing though is an incentive structure, right? So the original incentive structure with this, having it so open the way it is, created this environment for these bad actors to do what they're doing. Now they're closing these loopholes, of course, like you're pointing out. This is down the road that they're closing them. They have all this time. Right now it's the mad dash to get as many people in through these systems as possible, because you know, it's about the same as when they lifted the mandate for masks, wearing masks during the COVID pandemic. The day that they said next month you're gonna have to not wear a mask, everybody stopped wearing them. Because why? The virus didn't have an end date, but these things do. And this creates an incentive for people to rush in. So there's going to be an influx, in my estimation, just on human nature, that there's going to be a massive influx of these people coming in to apply. But then afterwards, the question is, well, are we creating better incentives, or are we creating more perverse incentives to do more illegal things?
Yeah, you see, our immigration policy was based on bringing highly skilled immigrants from other countries. And this was the foundation on which the overall consensus for immigration policy existed.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when I said this on Twitter, some people disputed, saying that there was no consensus. Now, I agree, it cannot be 100%, but there was a very broad agreement. There will be dissenting opinions in any issue, but there was a very broad agreement as to immigration being a good thing both for Canada and for the immigrant. And this was founded on the fact that we were supposed to be looking for highly skilled immigrants so they could easily be absorbed in the workforce, in their fields of work, and then be productive, be remunerated accordingly. That was the ideal. Then there can be deviations from the ideal, but over a period of time, as I mentioned earlier, we had reached a point where highly qualified, highly skilled immigrants were finding it extremely difficult to be absorbed in the workforce, in their fields of work, and at the level that they should have been. So student policy was meant to bypass a problem, but then it became a beast, altogether different beast. So the whole focus in the process, if you look at the starting point and the ending point, the whole focus changed from getting highly skilled immigrants to getting cheap labor, which the immigration minister himself said openly in an interview, that we need cheap labor. So stands to reason that when you are looking for cheap labor, doctors from other countries or engineers from other countries are not going to apply.
No,
because they don't find being cheap labor, right? So the whole policy was stood on its head, and therefore it had to come to a point of confrontation where they would have no option but to walk back that policy. That is what has happened now, but I still wonder to what extent they have walked it back, because Canadian media is surprisingly silent on this, but it is reported extensively in Pakistani media that government of Canada has entered into an unofficial agreement with the province of Punjab in Pakistan, because the traditional area of Punjab is divided between India and Pakistan. So Canadian government has entered into an informal agreement with the provincial government of Punjab in Pakistan to bring workers from there. So they have found another source of cheap labor. Now they don't want Indian Punjabis. Now they want Pakistani Punjabis. So that explains some of the, gumption that the minister showed for this supposedly bold move.
Where is this shortage of cheap labor in Canada? I keep hearing stories about going to, Brampton or all these places where a lot of these immigrants are at, international students or whichever program they're going through to get here. And they're lining up. Like I'm talking about lines around the block at your local McDonald's, like your Best Buy, your any place where they're just looking for people to come in, stock shelves, flip burgers, entry-level positions, like what typically would be held by a high schooler, like through the 1990s when I was growing up. And a lot of these people were my friends doing these jobs. I did entry-level jobs when I was a kid. Now, where is the shortage? Because again, if there are lineups, then you would assume that we have too many. If there are doctors who are, they're not given permission to practice their expertise, and they're working at Uber with their own automobile, where's the shortage?
Yeah, you see, this whole labor shortage narrative is bogus, because the places where we actually have labor shortages, there are too many barriers to entry, and those barriers are the ones causing the shortage. Because you have foreign trained professionals, as you said, driving Uber or flipping burger, they are prevented from entering the workforce. And every time I hear about Canadian standards, like, have we Canadians descended from heaven that we have, higher than the standards of mere mortals? If there is, see, practices can differ. And there are certain ways of working that are very different from country to country or from society to society. So you need to bring that person across that cultural boundary. It may not necessarily be a question of standards, but every time I've been hearing about these standards for 20 years, and I'm absolutely fed up with it. Because you have to find a way. Person is here, they came here legally, their visa eligibility was ascertained based on their qualification and experience. And after they come over, the job market says, sorry, we can't take you because you don't have Canadian experience. So a bridge has to be found. Now, unfortunately, they tried to find a bridge through the study permit policy, and it went haywire and off the rails. But the already qualified and experienced professionals that are coming over, you have to find a way to in the old days of management theory, there used to be something called vestibule approach. Just as two trains of a car, two cars of a train are connected by a vestibule, you provide a connecting bridge kind of that helps the person walk from one part to the other.
Mm-hmm.
So it was called a vestibule approach. Nobody has heard about it in Canada apparently, so we haven't tried it yet. But if a person who used to be a doctor, on Twitter I am in touch with someone who is a gynecologist from Bangladesh. He came over here, he blew all his life savings on trying to get certified. He still couldn't get permission to practice. Finally he packed up and left and went back to Bangladesh, where he is living happily now. It's just a bad dream that he had in Canada.
Oh wow.
So there has to be a way to absorb the talent that comes over into the workforce, but then there are too many barriers to entry. So because of all this, our immigration policy right now is cross-eyed. It has no fixed focus, it has no fixed target. There is nothing that it single-mindedly attempts to achieve in terms of value to society. It may provide value to immigration consultants and owners of colleges and maybe politicians in terms of votes, because they get to virtue signal, but it's not working for the society.
So there is
no labor shortage. to answer your question.
Well, not in the entry level position market. That's for sure. There's no shortage there. There is shortages in skilled labor. That's absolutely for sure. That's become more and more prevalent over the years. I mean, I'm in the automotive mechanic world, and it's difficult to find technicians to fill positions in shops. I know in my town, every mechanic shop is looking for people. They're looking. Any applicant is welcome. Come in and, you know, give your application and we'll consider you. We're considering all kinds of people. And I mean, a brother of mine, he works in the trucking world in Northern Ontario, and there are no new guys from Canada getting into the field. In fact, excuse me, he was telling me just recently that most of the guys that he works with are all on the cusp of retiring if they haven't already retired. And there's no drying up of work in the mining sector and these kinds of things where there's operations happening. And what's happening is a lot of it's being filled in with immigrants, and a lot of immigrants are getting pumped through these schools, and they feel like, a lot of the professionals feel like, well, maybe they're rushing them through it too much, because maybe they don't seem like they know what they're doing in the case here. A lot of people who don't, they're coming with zero experience. Now, when it comes to mechanics or other trades, we do have the Red Seal system in Canada. So for those who don't know how this works, the Red Seal works everywhere in Canada. It's a license to operate in whatever trade, except Quebec, because Quebec's always exempt from everything because they have different laws. It's complicated. But in Canada, if you have your Red Seal certificate, you can legally work under that profession anywhere in Canada. It's kind of like the colleges in the professional world. Now, the Industry Training Authority is what issues this, and foreigners who make a claim that they are from that realm or from that work, they can challenge the Red Seal. They can give proof that they had employment from their home country and say, I've worked in this field, I'm certified there, can I challenge this? And then they write an exam. And if they pass the exam, then they can be given their Red Seal certification. Now, this is a fast track for a lot of tradespeople. Unfortunately, there's not a lot of tradespeople coming into Canada, despite all of this attempt to bring in people for labor shortages. There's not a lot of mechanics applying. There's not a lot of carpenters and whatnot, electricians, you name it. But there are a lot of professionals, say doctors, nurses, people in this kind of field, and there is no system available for them. So they're stuck with drive an Uber and hopefully go back to university and study your doctorate here, like, or doing internships here, starting from the bottom. What do you think is the situation here? Would a Red Seal type thing be a good workaround?
It would be, yeah. I mean, I heard Pierre Poilievre talk about setting up another blue seal kind of a thing for professions, just as there is Red Seal for trades. But, you know, as we discussed last time, in 2 years, after taking more than 800,000 immigrants, only 251 of them were in the trades.
That's unbelievable.
Under federal skilled worker program. So, you know, I don't know how it can be successful, number one. Number two, these barriers that are there to entry, they are, I'm sorry to say this, but they are basically a means to protect a fief, you know, protect territory. So I don't know how any government is going to override that, because my understanding is that the professions are regulated not at the federal level but at the provincial level, which is why you have College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario, not of Canada. So how far a federal government can put its foot down and, you know, push the people through the licensing process, I'm not sure. There are jurisdictional issues here. And until push comes to shove, those issues are going to be an obstacle, because as we saw in the international student issue also, Until yesterday, everything was like, this is provincial government, this is provincial government. And suddenly now the federal government has realized that it can control the tap in terms of how many student visas they are going to issue. So, because it became detrimental to their own political future is when they have acted.
Yes.
So I don't see how this can be an easy solution for professions as well. Although Mr. Polyev keeps promising that, I think he's going to have an uphill task if he tries.
Yeah, so what I was describing about the Red Seal, that was something, I think it was an uphill battle to make that happen, because prior to that, it was provincial jurisdiction that granted you your through the provincial industry training authority. Now there's a federal one. Yeah, I'm registered through the federal one. I'm not sure how that had to come about. It took decades to make it happen, though. I do know that. And so, yeah, a federal blue seal could take some time, could take some fighting, but with the situation that we're having as it is, perhaps we could move things a little bit faster than the speed of government when it comes to that. So this is the interesting part about this whole debate, or this whole debacle, is that yes, we do have an immigration problem. We have an immigration problem in the sense that we do need more people. But we're not getting the people that we need. In fact, we're getting the people we don't need coming here, and there's no incentive for the people we do need to come. And this is the problem. And how does the government get it so wrong? Is this intentional? Like, are they intentionally getting it wrong, or is it a bit of both? Is it how does this happen?
You remind me of a scene from the British TV series Yes Minister.
Okay.
Or Yes Prime Minister. I'm not sure which one, but there's this politician and his chief of staff, or head of the bureaucracy, and Sir Humphrey Appleby. So the Prime Minister asks, is the government policy wrong? And Sir Humphrey says, almost all government policy is always wrong, frightfully well carried out. Wow. Because carrying it out is part of the bureaucracy's function. So it is frightfully well carried out. So when you have a frightfully well carried out policy that is bad policy, you have the worst possible outcome.
Yes.
Right? So
yes.
How they got it wrong, it's, that's basically because unfortunately, the kind of people that we have in politics, and I have written about this at some length, barring exceptions, there are exceptions, great people in politics, but barring those exceptions, we get people who used to be activists, part of student organization or whatever, or at the social level, or coming from a particular ethnic or religious community. Those activists, they pick up a cause, make themselves known, make connections, network with people, and become electable based on that support, not based on any qualities. And then, they end up in the parliament, whether in the province or federally. So you find people who have absolutely no idea about the issues at hand, and how are they going to push back? Then we have party structures that are too top heavy. So individual MP or MPP or MLA doesn't have much say. Their job is to vote as they are told. They cannot speak up against the party or the party's leader. If you look at the UK, for instance, there is a stark contrast where, the MPs of the party will be absolutely on the offensive when they feel that they cannot agree with something, a policy of their own party or their leader. They can be extremely vocal and absolutely ferocious. Whereas here we have a situation that can only be described as docility. Nobody goes against the party, nobody goes against the party leader. And if they do, they are thrown out. But those are far and few between. And therefore, we have an acquiescent class of politicians. People who don't object to anything, people who have no spine, and as I said, barring exceptions, but they don't have a fixed stand on anything. Until yesterday, they may be saying one thing, and today, because the leader or the minister or whoever decided to reverse direction, they will once again be for that opposite position. So you get into these bad policies because the people who are voting on the policies are, they don't have what it takes to ensure that the policy is a sound one.
Or they have no conviction whatsoever.
They have no conviction, and very often they have absolutely no idea what is involved here.
Well, and we've all seen the nepotism of the Trudeau government as we've seen it in recent years. I mean, Mark Miller, I think there's photographs of him in the wedding party of Justin Trudeau, along with other cronies that we all are familiar with now. It seems like, it almost seems like a game that they're playing here. Be in government, try to make it last as long as possible. Don't really have an opinion one way or another. Just go with the flow of where the narrative's going.
Yeah, that's basically it. Which is why we end up with bad policies, not just on the international student issue, but on a host of other issues as well.
That's unbelievable. I just, when watching Mark Miller talking about going back on his policy, it just seemed so defeated, actually. But because it's a public opinion thing that's actually driven this. And I've been preaching this. I've been telling people this quite a bit, and this is kind of in the thread of Andrew Breitbart saying, politics is downstream of culture. You change the culture, and then the politicians will follow suit, because, as you pointed out, there's no conviction. They have no real conviction. They're going with the ebbs and flows of what's happening right now in social media culture. The social media is where all of this is really taking place, and you and I are at the forefront of this, and trying to bring people's attention to these serious issues that are affecting a lot of people's lives, especially when you're considering people. And I think this is something that maybe people might want to take a step back and then look at other people's lives from their perspective. Like, maybe have a little bit of empathy into what goes on here. Now, we're talking about people that are willing to pack up their entire lives, get on a plane. We're not getting on boats anymore. Those days are over. Get on a plane and fly over to Canada with a suitcase in hand, ready to start an entirely new life. Like, that's not a small thing to do. This is a big thing that people are doing. They're doing it with all the best intentions of actually making a life for themselves. Whether or not they want to become Canadian, because this is something we've discussed as well, but they're actually making a giant step for their life, a giant leap, as you might, if you're an astronaut, you might say. But this is a big thing, and a lot of people kind of trivialize this and say and don't look empathetically into the lives of other people, and just they're numbers. They're just a number on a sheet of paper to see where the GDP is going to be next year, or what have you. This is a real humanitarian issue. If we have policies like this and we're ruining people's lives, we should be held accountable for that. Yeah,
and it takes a very engaged citizenry to keep the government accountable, and we have seen sparks of that or flashes of that in the last little while. But generally speaking, unfortunately, our citizenry is either not engaged, or if they are engaged, they are too much into their tribal affinity, tribal loyalty. So they will not criticize something that their side has done. Right? You cannot have a healthy polity with that kind of tribalism.
No, not at all. Not at all. And it's just been getting, stronger and stronger in recent times. Obviously, we've seen how American politics have been playing out. It's largely very split down the middle. It's very split and diametrically opposed. And Canada has been moving in this direction as well. But then you add this other element, these other people who have been welcomed in, and half the population are just like, no, you should never have come. And we owe you nothing, you leave, you know. And then the other half of the population is saying, well, we need to spend our own resources to make it up to these people. Where do you find middle ground on that?
Yeah, the middle ground is actually in deciding how many people should be allowed to move to Canada. But that is somehow seen as a racist thing to do, or that is, a dominating narrative saying, even I have been told that you want to pull the ladder up behind you. Well, I don't care who comes here, but I want them to be happy and prosperous, right? I have no incentive. If somebody comes after me and then settles, it doesn't affect my life. I have no reason to be jealous of that person to want to pull that ladder up. But I'm looking at the overall situation where there is a healthy rate of growth, and beyond that, it becomes unhealthy. And I don't care where they come from. They can come from Latin America, Africa, Asia, Middle East, East Asia, Europe, wherever. It doesn't matter. As long as the person has the same core values that we spoke about in the last chat, and is willing to have a sense of shared destiny, that we are together going to have the same destiny, then I'm perfectly happy with it. But you can't talk about that. And even on this international issue, it was not possible to talk about this until 6 months ago. And actually, I remember on 18th of July last year, I asked this question to Pierre Poilievre. I was at a press conference here in the GTA.
Oh, you had the opportunity to ask him this question.
Yeah. And I recorded that on my phone. And I said, last year, that was in 2022, our population increased by 1 million, more than 1 million. And most of it was because of international students. And we are also looking at a housing crisis. So do you think bringing these numbers down can be part of the solution? This was my question. And he answered it with a lot of numbers and data and all, but he didn't actually address it head on. And when I posted that on YouTube, a lot of people were unhappy, and he's part of the uni party and all those epithets. But
I'm tired of that,
I said,
honestly.
I said, look, this is politics. He has to measure when he can say what. So basically my job at that point was to lob the grenade in the field, which I did.
Absolutely.
After that, if you check online, and I'm not boasting about this, if you check online, you will not find this issue being discussed in the public sphere before 18th of July 2023. That is when I threw that grenade. And then it has snowballed to a point where, this is now, it has forced a change in policy. So it works. But one needs to be non-partisan about this. I did not ask him to trap him in something. I did not force him to answer it. My point was to get the question out there in the public. If Mr. Poilievre doesn't answer it, that's fine. And had it been Prime Minister Trudeau, that would have been fine. The idea has to be to start a conversation and not necessarily trap the other guy or support the other guy. That is
absolutely
one part of journalism that I don't see it here, where a journalist will frame a question in such a way that it's a gotcha question, like I have laid this trap for you and now I dare you to walk into it. So that's where journalism is also failing. But that was one fortuitous moment where they said they are taking questions. Mr. Poilievre gave his speech covering all the points about housing crisis and immigrants not being able to work in their fields, and he gave his speech, and then my question was completely different. But when they said you can ask a question, this one popped up in my head, and I threw that grenade in because I thought it was important to bring it in public discussion.
Well, they're professionals at avoiding things. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what they do best. We have question period, of course. I've always joked that it's a good thing they never called it answer period, because you'd be really disappointed. But I wanted to bring this to your attention because as you're talking, you made me think of something that I did in a video. And this was actually a month ago I brought this up. The other reason for the housing crisis we can't talk about, and it says immigration on the thing, big shush. But in this video, really, because I'm going to get to some of the points here. And here's something that I always do for people that watch. Why this is interesting. They actually didn't pop up down here. Well, I normally put all the links to in the description for all the things that that are in the video, but and I'll make sure to update this one so they're on there. But this is something interesting because there was a point at which they stopped talking about immigration, and the conservative leader Pierre Poilievre actually did at one point discuss immigration, and he did sometimes at length, and talking about this plan that the liberals have, or these elitists, or whatever they want to call them. And here's what he said in this. But these are things that he did say. Here's 6 months ago, something that he mentioned talking about our immigration policies that are being put forward.
The Prime Minister gleefully tells us about all the wonderful meetings he's having with mayors about housing and infrastructure. I don't really care about their meetings, Mr. Speaker, because the gatekeepers at municipal governments, the government that this Prime Minister is funding with billions of dollars, are blocking housing construction so that our immigrants, our working class, and our youth cannot get homes. Yes, Mr. Speaker, after 8 years of this Prime Minister, everything is broken. But instead of fixing the basics, he's focused on another grand utopian project, that of his friend Dominic Barton, the multinational CEO, former ambassador to communist China, who helped bring about the opioid crisis that is savaging our working class families, has come up with a bright new idea that he's going to triple our national population to 100 million. Mr. Speaker, we don't need any more utopian schemes from globe-trotting millionaires and multinational insiders. What we need is some common sense.
Yeah. So he did bring this stuff up, and this is what I was covering in that video, was that up at a point, he just completely stopped talking about it. And it was right around the time that they started comparing him to Trump directly and saying that, well, because everybody's famous. I mean, everyone knows the famous build the wall. They're not sending all of their best, and then the media, of course, turning that into racist epithets, which were largely untrue. But it worked. It worked, and this is a narrative that worked to get people completely against Donald Trump. And now that they are trying to label him Donald Trump, he's completely avoided the immigration topic. He'll, when directly asked about it, he'll mention common sense. We just want common sense, but won't dive into it much. But I've definitely noticed this as you bring this up, because he actively wants to stay away from this topic, even though this is probably one of the biggest issues here in Canada right now.
See, this issue impacts on a lot of other major issues like housing, right? The availability and the cost. Then there is the healthcare issue, where things have been bad. I have written extensively about it with official data and all. This is a 50-year-long slide in healthcare system. So I don't pin it on any particular party or government. Everybody has contributed in equal measure to that. But on healthcare also, when you have this kind of an explosive growth in population, it is bound to have an effect. Then there are, availability of schools, for example, because the, school board or municipality or whoever is in charge of that needs to know how many kids are coming. Here in the GTA, it's very common to see schools putting up, porta cabins, portables for their classes. And then some genius will decide that it is the kindergarten that has to be in the portable class and the upper grades have to be in the building. So now you have a problem because every 10 minutes, one kid needs to go to the washroom.
Right.
Things like that. So that is a secondary issue, but you see, you need to be able to plan based on a scenario that you know is coming. But when you don't know how many people are going to move to this area, how many are going to need schooling, availability of family doctors, which is at a very low level, and especially in British Columbia, I know.
Yeah, I know.
Seeing the
We're
data,
without one. We're without one,
it's
and a
brutal.
waiting list to get a new one. It's unbelievable.
Yeah, it's brutal. So it impacts on everything. Now, when I was growing up, India's population rate of population increase was 2.3%, and we were told that it is too high and it is holding us back in terms of achieving economic progress because it's too much of a drain on the resources. And last year, Canada's rate of population growth was what, 3.2%. That was like almost 50% higher than what was causing India's poverty. So we were starting, thankfully, from a place of prosperity. So, but it was bound to have an effect here in Canada, right? So this, treating certain issues as taboo doesn't work. It can only work in ideological setting where everybody agrees on the ideology. But in the practical aspects of the world, you cannot have taboos on discussing immigration because that is painted to be racist or xenophobic. I did not notice that Mr. Polyev had stopped talking about immigration, but now that you mention it, this is what comes to my mind.
Absolutely. Yeah, the taboos. And this is, and people will say the left, the right, whatever. Yeah, maybe the left is currently doing it, and that might be accurate. But this is the tool of sophistry, of absolutely saying to the other side, oh, you're not allowed to discuss this. This is for whatever reason, it's become a taboo. You're not allowed to say these particular things because it's off limits. It creates a situation where now that thing's off limits. This is where the public largely wants to be and to be discussing things. But I feel that this is backfiring. I mean, on a political level, it's backfiring. And I feel that the Conservatives are doing largely what any political party in this position would do, and they're latching onto the issues that the common people want, and especially when we might be going into an election moving forward. Now, this isn't an endorsement. This is just me saying we're bringing these up, right? We're making these popular issues because they're concerning to the average person. So obviously the people on the outs, the people, the political party that's on the out will start radically changing their policies to gain votes. They've done this along the boards with the carbon tax in Atlantic Canada. They're doing this now with immigration. They've done this with a number of other issues. And of course, the opposition party, who has everything to gain in this situation, will largely bring these to the table. Now, the hope here is that they're not epithets, and they're not just empty promises. That's always the hope, and anyone who's watching can take that with what they want, however they want to take that sort of rhetoric there. That it could be them just making promises, but. So long as we keep this at the forefront, and this is what I think is so important about journalism, especially independent journalism, as we saw recently. I don't know if I have this up right now, but the state of journalism in Canada is it's absolutely ridiculous. Actually, I do have this handy. I'll just pop this on the screen because this is largely how gross it's gotten. So CTV released an article yesterday saying Trump jealous of Trudeau because he's younger and way better looking. Like this is the level of journalism in Canada. Of course, I wrote, and to think CBC may have gone out of business had Trudeau not given them hundreds of millions of your tax dollars. But this is where we're at. You have to come to the internet now. You can't go to the typical news media to get any of these stories. You have to come to Twitter pages like Darshan Maharaja and YouTube channels like Clyde Do Something to get this kind of, and I'm not saying we're the only ones. Of course, there are many doing great work out there, but this is where we're at now. we can't rely on the institutions that we once had in a position, the fifth estate as they call them. And I think this really focuses our energy on pushing forward with independent journalism. Of course, again, thank you so much for everything you've done.
Oh, you're welcome. I do it just because, that's what as a Canadian I should be doing. But, today's kind of reversal of policy or change in policy is gratifying on that front, that, independent voices on the internet have pushed the, government to do something by raising awareness among the people. It's not perfect. There are still ifs and buts about that policy, but it's still better than what was the case until yesterday. So I'm happy about it.
Yeah, I'm happy. Of course, we're playing whack-a-mole with now the new policy of bringing people from Pakistan over in droves. Without the scheme of the universities, they're just gonna be issuing visas there. So this might be something we could actually, again, as journalists, bring more light to that kind of story, so people know what's going on. Again, whack-a-mole. You pop one policy down and another one pops up somewhere else, and this is the way it goes. But without going too much further, I know you're a busy guy, you got lots to do today. I want to thank you so much, Darshan, again for coming on the show. And I feel like this is not the end of it, and we're probably going to be talking about this again in the near future and seeing where we're going. Is there anything else you wanted to add today before we finish this off?
No, I guess we'll have to see the fine print on this new policy, because I tried to go to Government of Canada website and I couldn't see it. Maybe I didn't give it enough time. I was just in a hurry. So, but once I go through the details, then if there is something worth talking about, then we'll certainly let people know.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again for joining me.
Thank you so much.